Welcome to today's podcast episode. This show exists to be able to explore how TTRPGs have an effect on the people who experience them. We like to talk about how the games that we play have a deeper impact on our world and the way that we tend to experience them, and therefore we are more than D&D characters. Today we have Jordan with us from Rule of Cool, and I'm super excited to get a chance to interview you, particularly because Kate and I reached out to you because we've actually been loving the content you've posted on TikTok for what feels like a really long time. And I say that, and then I remember through us talking, I realized you've not been posting for that long. It's only been a couple of years. I think we must have started following you somewhere near the beginning of your stuff. And I hope this comes across the way that I'm intending it. But Kate and I loved your content before you had, I think you had less than 10,000 followers at that time. Yeah. And Kate and I were always like, why doesn't Rule of Cool have more followers? It doesn't even make sense to me. 100% deserves way more clout than I feel like what you were getting at the time, which since then you have grown quite a bit. So anyways, we literally have just kind of geeked out over your content before. So just letting you know.
Thank you. I really appreciate hearing that.
Yeah, I don't know. You do so many different kind of meme contents and I don't know. I just feel like you do it so well. And it's a lot of content that I feel like people kind of do similar stuff, but you just, I don't know. I feel like you deserve all the internet clout. So I hope that you keep finding your community and everything because we just love the stuff that you put out. So
thank you so much.
Yeah. So when we kind of talked about having you on the show, we discussed a couple of different options for kind of what you want to talk about. And we ended up landing on how TTRPGs serve as a creative outlet for you. So what about that topic made you think yes, that's the one that I can talk on?
It's just, it was my first real introduction into my creative side. I've always been creative in nature, playing with toys as a kid and stuff like that, and coming up with long, abstract stories that didn't make sense, but made sense to me. And then at some point, transitioning that from the stupid little games I play by myself to Dungeons and Dragons or whatever system we're playing in, it became how I started moving into writing stories. And now I've unpublished, written 2 books, working on getting them published. Working on the 3rd book in the installment. So it's been this domino effect of one thing to another.
Yeah, that's amazing. But I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about how you got into TTRPGs in the first place, but I just love that storytelling elements have always been something that you've enjoyed, whether you're talking about your childhood and the games that you play to TTRPGs to actually writing and publishing books is amazing. I mean, to me, that just proved right there, how much having creative outlets and storytelling outlets, what that means to you,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. Very cool. Well, I always explain kind of how these episodes are set up. So we'll start by kind of talking about your D&D or TTRPG backstory and kind of where you're at now. And then we'll dive into more of the details of the topic of today's episode. So to start, how did you get introduced to TTRPGs?
A little bit of context. I have 4 older brothers. I'm the youngest of 5. One of my brothers was, for a time, featured on the page. And I watched my 2 oldest brothers play Dungeons and Dragons. And there's a 10-year difference between us. So they'd be in high school and I'm 7, not understanding what's happening. But it was just so cool to watch them tell a story, make jokes, collaborate, plan. And it was I was awestruck by the idea of rolling dice and telling a story. And so that's where my introduction into the game happened. And then I always wanted to play. They kept telling me, you're too young, you wouldn't get it. But one day, high school rolled around, I met a guy, and he was like, hey, come join my table. And the rest is history.
So it's interesting thinking about having all those older siblings and saying, you know what, like maybe you're too young for this. I get that. Although also kind of sad for you, you know, like little Jordan. I totally get that. It's like, man, come on. You just want to be involved when you have older siblings, you know? But first playing D&D in high school, I feel like is a really common time that people first start playing. I'm curious if you do feel like that's the ideal time to start playing. Like, were your brothers kind of right? Was it too soon? Or you're like, nah, man, like you could play sooner than high school? I don't know.
You know, I think there's got to be a balance to be walked, because D&D sometimes does explore more of a mature theme, and it doesn't have to always be like, you know, grotesque or anything like that, but there are themes that are more catered to an adult mind. And so, yeah, I think maybe a kid wouldn't understand it and appreciate it as well. But I don't think you gotta fully exclude them. You know, you can, they can be an NPC. Why not?
Yes, yes. Well, and you know, there's TTRPG, even whole systems that are very focused on kids. So like it's very doable for that. But when you're talking very traditional, what I almost want to call like stereotypical D&D, I totally see what you're saying, where it's like, yeah, I mean, you can't just include a kid in any and all of it, because there's plenty of it where it's like, yeah, a lot of people's campaigns would not be suitable for kids.
Right.
Okay, so cool. So now I'm curious, when you decided to start making D&D content, both social media, and then you had a podcast for a while, like tell me your journey into getting into all of that.
Yeah, honestly, it was just January. I think it was, oh gosh, I don't know when I started. January 2023, that's what it was. I was just, you know, me and my buddies, we've been friends since high school. And I was like, look, guys, we've talked about making a podcast for as long as we played D&D. You know, we fell in love with podcasts like The Adventure Zone and stuff like that. And we were like, why not? Let's give it a shot. And finally, after enough time, I just said, look, we do it now or we don't do it at all. And that was the creation of the Rule of Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so you started the social media page because you had also wanted to start a podcast? Was that like kind of happen at the same time?
Right. They were kind of my friends were kind of focused on like, let's just go ahead and jump into the podcast. And I was like, no, let's build a brand. Let's be somebody, and then we can talk about podcasting. So originally the idea was we were all going to make posts and do things as a group, and then it sort of evolved into me and my brother doing things, and now it's just me. So.
Man, I relate with so much of that. I mean, getting an audience for podcasting is super challenging, and social media is definitely that most popular method. But then like social media is a beast all on its own, you know? So I love that you were motivated to do that. You saw the value in that, and that it's kind of shaken down at this point to just being you posting that. But like I said, I just feel like at this point, you do have a pretty good audience of people who appreciate you and what you do in your style, right? So
yeah, I mean, I try my best.
I'm curious why you chose the name Rule of Cool.
So funny story. I was not the one who picked that name. My brother Cameron was. We originally were going to be called the Players Table, because anytime I'm DMing, I am focused on how can I make sure my players have a good time. Like I'm not focused on telling a story and getting a message across. I just want to make sure my players are having fun. So I've always encouraged the idea of having the Players Table. But then my brother looked at me and he was like, dude, we don't follow the rules. we don't do anything by the book. So he was like, let's go with the very common D&D name, the Rule of Cool.
Yes.
So that was the story of it all. You know, it's just my brother threw it out there and we all laughed and said, cool.
No, I love that. I love your original idea as well of the Players Table. And honestly, very parallel vibes there. The Players Table and Rule of Cool. Yeah. I just feel like that together probably explains a lot of your philosophy around D&D. So I actually think that's way fun. Like that's a cool, fun fact to know. So okay. So you had the podcast for a while. Tell me a little bit about what it was like running a show and sort of its beginning and end.
We learned very quickly that, and I feel like you guys can understand this just as much, that making a D&D podcast and playing D&D are two different beasts. So we had the growing pains of what equipment do we use? How do we structure episodes? Stuff like that. And it was toward the middle of our second campaign, the second run into our podcast, that we all sat down and we were just like, this doesn't feel the same. We're not playing the same way. We're not telling the stories the same way we would. So we learned very quickly that podcasting just wasn't our thing.
Yeah, you know what? Like, it's one of those things I think a lot of people are like, that sounds so fun. And I'm like, it is. It
Yes.
really is. I don't want to scare anybody away from it, but also it is not the same. If you have enjoyment out of D&D, it does not equal you would enjoy being a part of a podcast, because D&D is already so collaborative. You got to care about your own story and the players and the DM. Like, that's already a lot of people to collaborate with. But then when you add a whole element of like, we have like an audience of people watching us,
right?
Like you said, episode structure and like your sound quality and like writing a story for people other than the people only on your table. I mean, like, it's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, never, and I always encourage people, if they do want to hear the podcast, do not listen to our early episodes because we were not even worried about sound quality. My buddy David showed up with a PlayStation 5 headset and it sounded so bad.
You know what? We started our podcast in 2019, and those first, is there 2 campaigns? 2? Yeah, I'm not even sure. 2 campaigns that like are just off the internet. Like you cannot find them. They're actually on our Patreon, but for the most part, I'm like, you don't need to listen to those. No hate to the players and people that we were playing with at the time. It's just that, like, yeah, the learning curve is intense.
Yes,
it's intense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting, though. And I super respect anybody who has ever had a show before, for sure. Mm-hmm. So now, especially because you decided, you know what, podcasting, not for me, but D&D and TTRPGs, still for you. What kind of games are you in right now? What does that look like?
Yeah, my brother Cameron, he's the one DMing right now. We're set in a world that it's at war. There's a big revolution. And he actually did something really cool that we haven't done before. He created 2 storylines and gave us the option on which side of the story we would be on. And of course, us being players, we went with neither. And currently, I'm playing a teddy bear named Sir Franklin, Knight of the Blankie.
Wow. Love.
And yeah, we're having a great time. We're 4 sessions in. So we're having a good time.
That's so fun. That's such a fun character idea. Mm-hmm. And also, wow, if there's just one thing that sums up D&D players, it's like you give them 2 options and they're going to choose a third.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a good thing you guys run off of the rule of cool, you know?
All
like
the time,
you gotta
absolutely.
gotta improv all that. Okay, that is so fun. I'm glad that you get to play. I'm glad you get to play with your brothers, you know, that like obviously eventually it's come back around and you get to be a part of that group at this point, right?
Full circle.
Yes, exactly. Okay, well, let's dive into our episode topic today. So how do you see TTRPGs as being a creative outlet, just in general?
Well, I think TTRPGs, like, it's such a unique game. No other game out there will let you be able to push limits that far. Because at the end of the day, you know, you're able to express yourself so freely in a TTRPG. Other video games, it's like you have lines of code that you have to follow, but in TTRPG, it's like, if my dice say I can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just it's great to be able to think of something in a creative and new fashion and just have the opportunity to go that route just because I can roll some dice and I can narrate.
Yes. The open-endedness part of TTRPGs is just crazy, you know, and it really just not comparable to other things to be able to have choices where like the possibilities are really endless. And to me, that is the essence of creativity, you know, to not be limited by something. And so I totally agree with what you're saying. So how have whoa, how have TTRPGs been a creative outlet for you personally? Like, how do you utilize them?
I talked about it briefly in the beginning, but they were my jumpstart. I never really had confidence to tell a story and to write, even though I've always had that drive to do it. I just didn't have the boldness to try for it. But now that I've had years of various campaigns under my belt where I have to write whole worlds and characters and lore and all this stuff, like it just made me realize, like, if I can do this and have my friend group appreciate it, what would be the difference in just writing something and pushing out and hoping the world can appreciate it too?
Yeah, for sure. There's something to be said about the accessibility of TTRPGs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to jump in and write a book, or to be a storyteller in a lot of other aspects, there might be a little bit of a barrier of entry there on how to get started, and a boldness there. And so it's really cool that, like you said, that was able to give you a little bit of a jump start. And what I think is even cooler is the fact that that did end up leading into doing more with that. It makes me wonder. I mean, like, I think you're very capable of writing a book, whether or not you had been involved with TTRPGs, but it makes you wonder how your life could have been different if that simply just wasn't a part of your life at all, right?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine if I didn't have a friend group who encouraged me the way they do, with story writing and helping me to grow that part of me, I imagine I never would have had the courage to look myself in the face and say, "Hey, sit down and write something." You know?
Yeah. Yeah, that actually perfectly goes along with my next question too. I know that you kind of have already answered this, but when I was writing up questions for you, I was wondering, like, do you feel like you were already a creative person before? Which I know you kind of talked about how that was true for you in your childhood, but then also, like, what did TTRPGs end up unlocking for you? Like, was there something new there in the way that it propelled you? Do you have anything to add with that? Even though I kind of feel like you've
Yeah,
answered that a little bit.
I used to get in trouble a lot in school because I wouldn't be paying attention. I'd be off somewhere else having a grand adventure in my head. Um, and it was always like super scatterbrained and not put together. But because of TTRPGs, it's helped me to focus in and like
Yeah.
apply what's going on up here into something that I can push out uh, and make a cohesive story with.
Yeah, for sure. Writing stories, being in TTRPGs, whether you're DMing or you're playing, it is a very focused and driven activity. Even though creativity, like you said, it kind of sounds like you're just off in another world and, you're just kind of doing like whatever, especially to an outsider who doesn't, like, they've not experienced, they might not really get it.
Right.
I get that that might be what it seems like, but anybody who's actually played in a campaign or DM'd a game realizes, like, no, you really have to be able to, like, lock in and focus.
Right.
And yeah, like, and that's a whole skill on its own. And I think what you're saying, I think a lot of people would relate to the idea that they might have struggled in paying attention in school or accomplishing tasks, and have felt a little bit scatterbrained. And yet they're able to be successful in TTRPGs and they're able to almost like overcome that in a way. So yeah, it's cool to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's just like I said earlier. I think it's a great way just to hone that, and I agree with you fully on. It's not just a silly little wacky game where you can do whatever you want, be whoever you want, wherever you want. You actually have to be very, very intentional on what's going on.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So when I think of creativity, I also think of self-expression. Is there a way that TTRPGs have allowed you to express parts of yourself?
100%. There are parts of my life that live forever through moments of the game, that we can we still talk about certain moments from the campaign that I can recall exactly why I wrote them. Um, so it's really interesting that like a game about dice has has let me express areas of myself that otherwise I wouldn't. And I think it's just really cool that that's something that this game encourages.
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you said about there are moments that, you've done things or written things for your characters that you know exactly why it was that way and that you'll always remember that. The fact that it can be so personally significant to you that like those aren't moments that can just kind of like go away is like pretty
Yeah,
crazy, It's cool.
absolutely.
Definitely very significant. I don't know that like everyone accomplishes that in D&D too, but the fact that that's even just a possibility, and that's been your experience, like I love that. I think that's awesome. I know that you had mentioned at one point that D&D has kind of been a safe space for you compared to other times in your life. I don't know if the thought behind that is times where you were, I don't know, getting in trouble in school or like, I don't know, like growing up in different kinds of spaces where maybe being creative wasn't as like acceptable and
Yeah.
everything. I'm curious, this is kind of a strange question, but I'm curious, like if TTRPGs wasn't that space for you, you probably would have had a very different experience overall. Like a lot of the things that you've gained from it, creativity and self-expression wise, simply might not have been accomplished had not been a safe space for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Mental health has always been something that has been a huge struggle for me. Um, and I haven't had a way to realistically talk about it too terribly much. Even now, it's kind of difficult to explain everything. But like when I get to sit down, not only does like not get to sit down and play this game, like not only does it alleviate some of that tension that I face, but like I can work through some of those emotions that I'm feeling. Um, and like you said, it's a safe space to do it. Partially because I don't even really have to say what I'm going through. I can just kind
Mm-hmm.
of move through the motions of it. I don't have to sit down with a person and be like, "Hey, this is going on, this is going on, and this is going on." With this game, I can sit down and just this is happening in my life. How can I express this? How can I find some relief in this moment? And sometimes it's as simple as having just a funny, silly game, and sometimes it's actually uh, expressing how I'm feeling in that moment and being truthful with
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. But when you take aspects of your life, the fact that you have some options with it, whether it's leaning into the silly, fun parts of the game, or it's expressing something, or it's going through the motions of something, you have options kind of on how you can take those parts of your life and kind of use that to your advantage in one way or another. I'm
Absolutely.
interested in what you said about like, you don't always have to explicitly like say, this is what I'm going through right now. And here's how it's tying into my character and everything. But I'm curious if you feel like there's almost like a risk or like a vulnerability with putting those like maybe more delicate piece of yourself in your games without and maybe I'm wrong, but without like kind of discussing that with your DM or with your
Right.
players so that, like they're kind of primed for that. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Absolutely. With the group, I only do it as comfortably as I do because my group understands. Like that is something
Mm-hmm.
that it needs to be talked about. You need to have the ability to um, get confirmation that things like that is okay. Uh,
Yeah.
and with my friend group, we all go through stuff. we talk with each other to be real sometimes, and sometimes we bring those problems to the table.
Yeah.
And that's something that we are a-okay with. But that's not the case for everybody, and it's okay to pick and choose who to be okay with because you're going to run into tables sometimes that will not be as respectful of what you're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad that we dove into that a little bit because I just think that's a great point. It definitely depends on who you're with.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's kind of the expectation isn't the word I'm looking for, but like if people are prepared for that, especially I love when that's the entire tables culture where like anybody could bring that stuff up to the table and to be in that space and everybody just kind of gets it and everybody is supportive of that. That is a really cool space to be in. So I'm
Absolutely.
glad that that's been your experience. Because of course you're always going to have some people that I don't know have had bad experiences when trying to kind of be vulnerable with the way they play, in games.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. Okay, my next question is, do you ever take inspiration from your games into other creative endeavors, whether that's art, writing, music, cosplay? There's lots of different outside of TTRPG ways to be creative.
First off, love this question. Yes, 100% yes. There's there was a time that my wife played with us. She no longer plays D&D. She realized it's not for her. Even though she was fantastic at it, I will give her flowers.
That's amazing.
She played a character one time called Bell and Boot. It was two people as one character. And from that day on, I fell in love with that character. Every single campaign I've run has had a tavern called the Bell and the Boot. And now, in the books I'm writing, there is a tavern called the Bell and the Boot. So that's just a small example of like how something from a game transitioned into something that I'm creating. But plenty of times do I reference things to stuff I've already played. In fact, a future book I'm planning on writing is a campaign I'm planning on running. So there's there's so much you can take from the games if you're creative in that way. Art, especially art. I wish I could draw. I can't draw a circle. So, but like, I love seeing people who are just so artistically gifted taking their inspirations from the game.
Yeah. When I think about writing specifically and world building for writing, it's cool to think about taking moments within a TTRPG space. Obviously, it has to be significant. You have to have some sort of a connection or cool experience with that in order for you to be inspired to add that to your world. But what a great way to add richness and depth to a story, because you're like, okay, there is something cool here. There's lore here. There's a reason why I'm taking this from this space and adding it to this space. And so to just put something that feels inherently valuable into other spaces is like so fun. And even though you know the whole backstory with that, I genuinely believe like that adds richness that even somebody who doesn't know anything about the Bell and the Boot, to be able to possibly feel from that, Yeah. So that's so cool. Also, shout out to your wife. She sounds awesome.
She is.
Let's see. I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything here. Let's see. Well, I guess I also want to know if I don't want to miss anything as far as how TTRPGs have felt like they've influenced your writing. Like, is there anything else that you want to add to that?
I think I'm good on that. I don't know.
No, good. I just wanted to make sure to not skip over that because like I just feel like writing is like such a big thing. And also I should have shouted out your book and stuff at the beginning, but I guess we'll add that to the end. I want to give it its moment for sure. So I feel like when I think of creativity, you have to think of burnout as well. So do you ever run out of creativity? And if yes, how does that impact how you world build, show up in sessions, role play, write, all of that?
Yeah, I would say definitely. In fact, I did it recently. Lost my cat that I love dearly, and losing her was very hard, and it just kind of shut off the drive to be creative. So sometimes there's events that happen in life, and sometimes it just happens naturally. But you're going to run into moments where you're not as creative or not creative at all. And so when I don't have creativity, which has always been my outlet for getting through life, when I don't have it, I feel stuck. It doesn't just slow me down. It halts my progress completely. And yes, that does apply to even TTRPGs. I am not as engaged. I don't care as much. I'm not like willing to be a part of it as much. So yeah, running out of creativity, it completely ruins the ruins the game for me.
Yeah, but I love what you said though too, where you kind of implied like, but that is going to happen. Like there are things that will make it so that, hopefully temporarily, I say hopefully, I feel confident that it's always temporary, where like losing a pet, that's a great example of something where it's like, like that sucks and it's going to affect your creativity and the way that you function in those spaces and how much you feel like you can add to that. And it's hard, it sucks. but also inevitably it will happen sometimes as well.
Yeah.
So I'm also curious, like, what do you do when that happens? Because like you said, if it really does halt you and really make you feel pretty stuck, like, do you have any methods for like how to get through that time?
Absolutely. Shout out my therapist. It is.
Yay!
It is. There's a fine line between grace and growth, where one grace on the grace aspect, you can sit back and say, I'm human. I need rest. I can't produce where I don't have. So it's fine for one to say, hey, I don't have it in me, so I'm not going to do it. And that can be the case. And one day you will stumble into it again. But then you go to the growth side of things where it's, okay, I can't sit in this forever. So there is that line to walk. And I found that giving yourself time to move through the process, allow it to flow through you, and then take it back in the reins and take control again. When you feel like you have the strength to do that, sometimes you do have to brute force your way back into being creative.
Yeah. Yeah. I could not have said that better. The fact that you need space in both of those, or you need time in both of those spaces to some degree. And you shouldn't stay in one forever.
Absolutely.
You know? And I also like what you said about there might be a little bit of brute force to get you back into that growth stage. Sometimes I think that happens naturally. You know, we dip down and it just comes right back up and we're like, oh, glad that moment was over.
Yeah.
But there might be other times where it is very intentional. It is very like, I am setting a goal to do this creative thing, even though I don't want to,
Absolutely.
you know? Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. So that's something that you feel like that's something you've discussed and gleaned from therapy.
Yes. Yep. My therapist instilled that in me.
Yes, I love that. I love that because even though the concept of that sounds so simple, and here we are talking about that, oftentimes it requires those kinds of spaces to be able to really make progress in an area like that. That can't always just be like life advice that you just take hold of and you're like, great, now I'm better now, right? Like there's something to work through there. Also, just very pro that kind of thing. I'm a mental health counselor at a high school, so I'm just like, yay. So I love that. Okay, next, I'm wondering how TTRPGs compare to other forms of creative art, namely writing, since that is your choice of creativity.
While TTRPGs vary a lot from other forms of art, I do value them on the same level. Because at the end of the day, art is about people. It's about connecting, whether it's a painting, a song, a story, anything like that. It's at the end of the day, it's a drive to connect. And what is a TTRPG other than connecting? It's a collaborative story. So does it provide, like, does one D&D campaign change the course of the world and like make the world a better place? I wouldn't say every time. But it can make that one little group of people better. And it can bring people in that one little group closer. And from there, who knows what happens.
Yeah, for sure. It's significance to the people who experience it, right? Whether that's the people in your game or the people who are intaking your other forms of art, like people who are reading your book, right? And the community that's there. So that's really cool. I love that. And I also, it's cool to hear you feel like those things are equivalent in value in your mind as well.
Yeah.
I think that's very cool. Okay, do you think it's possible to play and enjoy TTRPGs for people who don't feel that they are creative?
Yes. Prime example, my brother Cameron. He's the one, like I said, currently DMing the campaign. He doesn't see pictures in his head. He'll tell you himself. He cannot create 3D images in his head. He doesn't have much in the way of creativity when it comes to that. But man, can he write a story? Because he is just wickedly intelligent. So, like, there's so many different aspects of TTRPGs that don't get accounted for outside of creativity. I mean, there's political intrigue, there's battle strategy,
Yes.
There's rules and mechanics that you have to learn and follow. And trust me, I don't know like half those rules and mechanics. I'm not a great player in that aspect. But there's people out there who can create a character so powerful that you can make your DM cry. And so like there's so many ways that people can enjoy this game without just being like creative. And if you're as long as you're willing to roll some dice and give a dramatic monologue here and there, then yeah, you'd love the game. You know?
Yes. Yes. I love your answer to this so much because I think I get a skewed sample of people that I talk to on this show, or even just people that I know personally, because a lot of the people I've surrounded myself with feel that TTRPGs are very emotional, very creative, very like self-development, almost oriented, you know? But I do I want to publicly say, yes, you can play TTRPGs like basically a flavor of board game. You know, you can have it be super strategic. You can super focus on combat, which can be really crunchy. You can be super into the rules. You can play a game that's a module, you know, and it's already written for you. That's not to say that there's no creativity in any of that. But if you're not the feelsy, pictures in my head, super descriptive, emotional, I want to put part of myself in my character. Like if you're not that person, I really do feel like there's still space in TTRPGs for you to enjoy. So I super appreciate your thought on that.
Absolutely. And I guess I would have been in that school of thought that you have to be a creative person to play Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, you know, game that you're playing. But, then I met my brother Cameron, and I think personally, like, he's a better DM than me when it comes to creating the story, which is kind of funny to say, you know, because I'm the one that's writing a book and we compete. It's fine. It's a brotherly love. But yeah, he's just so good at creating a world and balancing it, and like he's way good at political intrigue. So there's a slot for every person in a TTRPG table.
Yeah. There's a space for them, and then there's an entire table that can appreciate that kind of person, no matter who you are. You know, Absolutely. As long as you can find people that like mesh well with what you're looking for, like it'll be awesome. If you could design a TTRPG session specifically to encourage creative expression, what would it include?
Okay. Love this question. It's something that I've had to do before, because, you know, you bring in new players or players who are not as engaged at the table. You got to find a way to get them engaged and let them express themselves. So something I have done in the past is run puzzle dungeons. There's hardly any combat involved. It's just going into the dungeon and trying to find a solution that doesn't involve breaking something. You know, you got to think outside the box. It'd be something that players, like the dungeon, you would need to solve it to win. You can't just, I guess, you can't just brute force your way to the end. The puzzles themselves would be individually designed to play on characters' strengths that I think they've mentioned to me, or, you know, even backstories. You know, it's things to draw out portions of the character that I know is in there. So you throw in some solid roleplay moments and in a way to give the character a chance to express themselves. And at the end of it all, you give them treasure. You know, so give them treasure and level up.
Yes. You know, I didn't have any particular like expectation with this question. Like it was super open-ended, and I didn't know what I was going to get, or even if it would like, you know, necessarily click with you. But I love your response. I love how overall simple it is in a way. And I think there's something to be said about like when you're DMing, having something that's a little more open-ended allows players to fill in the gaps.
Yes.
You know, you don't have an expectation for it has to go this way. Well, that's a little less creative than, hey, here's a situation. I want to see you work through it, because it sounds like you, tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you almost would accept multiple possibilities of getting through a puzzle, just depending on what they give you. Like you said, brute force, you're just trying to break it. Maybe you're not going to accept that. That doesn't feel like it's as creative. But if you really feel like, wow, that was that was a creative way to try to get through that, then maybe they're rewarded for that. How fun.
Yeah, I've definitely designed puzzles with no solution in mind before. I just I throw something out there, and then the players find something. I go, sounds good enough, and then that's the solve.
I love that so much. And I've only DM'd a couple of times, but now that's on my DM bucket list, just to put out a puzzle with no solution and be like, I don't know, impress me, and then I'll let you go.
Right.
But I like that too. I think you mentioned that like it can be a good fit for new players as well, where it's like maybe combat feels really crunchy or something that's a little more complex and there's a whole storyline. Maybe that isn't I'm not saying it's a bad thing to start with, but I like the benefits of starting with something like a puzzle dungeon to be able to explore a little bit of the mechanics of D&D and the creativity aspect of it. And hopefully it ends up being a confidence building experience as well, because you're able to try and get rewarded, try, get rewarded. And like you said, give them treasure at the end, like give them something to feel proud of.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It comes down to like when you do something like that, it comes down to how much the person's willing to engage. And it's just whatever. My biggest rule I always want to like tell my players is whatever you put in, you get out. And so doing something like you mentioned earlier, that's open-ended, it's really character dependent.
Yeah, for sure. That's amazing. I'm curious how you feel like maybe your creativity has changed throughout time. You could go all the way back to being a kid to now, or even just through when you started playing TTRPGs or when you started writing a book. Like, has there been a sense of development there?
Wow. That's awesome. I guess when growing up, it was just about having fun, you know? I recall me and Cameron going over to a friend's house and we would come up with stories and like imagine we're in wars and stuff like that, and it was just about having fun. Now it's transitioned into a way I live my life. It's not just something I do to relax or have a good time. It's how I get through the day. When life gets a little hard and gets a little boring and monotonous, I can always escape to something else because I do have creativity as a tool. And that could be anywhere from writing my book, playing D&D. Sometimes it's just daydreaming. And it's really nice to have that in my back pocket whenever I need it. So that's a great question. I love that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's so cool, especially to discover that at some point in your adulthood, to realize like having a creative outlet is just something that, like you said, it helps me get through the day. It's something that goes beyond just something fun to do and to pass the time. Because that sounds so childhood, totally. Like, you're just floating along as a kid. Like, what even is life at that point? But to be an adult and say, no, like this propels me. And this is actually like a value that you hold. Some people, if we're using creativity as the object, and they were to write their top 10 values, creativity might not even be close to making it on that list for some people. But if you discover that is something that you care about and it should be a part of your life, it does mean something to you. And then you can live your life allowing yourself that. TTRPGs, writing books, whatever that ends up looking like you said, daydreaming. That's great. Like that sounds like part of the recipe to living a more fulfilling life to you, is just discovering that and then living by that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So insightful. It's very cool. Okay, that's actually all the questions that I have for you. But now like I said, I want to talk about your book. I'm like extra intrigued now, right? Because we've talked about all this stuff. So maybe it was better to do it at the end. So remind me of the title of it.
It's called A Loyal Sword.
A Loyal Sword. So, and this is the one that you're working on getting published, or that is already published?
I have no published works yet. Still working on that.
Oh, okay. Yes. I see that now. So tell me everything about like what you have going on and maybe what people can eventually expect from you.
Yeah. So it's going to be a trilogy. Working on the final book right now. The trilogy is called Sabers of Shadow and Flame. And it is about a sellsword named Cassius, who is hired, the first book at least, he is hired to protect a princess named Scarlet until her wedding day. However, Scarlet loves someone else, and she does not want to marry who the king has arranged her to. So she hires Cassius to double-cross the king and kidnap her to take her to her one true love.
Wow. What a fun premise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I love that.
It's been very fun to write.
Yes, so cool. So it is a trilogy series. You're working on the last book.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so cool. Well, if honestly, like when that gets published, because I'm going to put that out there in the universe, then tell us and we'll make sure to add it to the show notes so that people, like if there's a link to it, then people can just like go straight to it. Also, I mean, like we should just talk about it on social media too, since I'm like right now people are going to listen to your episode and be like, that's so cool. And like they can't access it right now.
Yeah.
So anyways, when that day comes, we'll have to kind of collaborate on that because that sounds amazing.
Thank you.
But yeah, speaking of that though, where can people find you and stay connected with you?
Best way to find me is TikTok at the Rule of Cool Pod. We used to be a podcast. At the Rule of Cool Pod on TikTok.
Okay, perfect. I'm so jealous of you that like you have TikTok and you're like going full send like into TikTok. I would love to be on one platform and to really like just have a community there and be like, this is my community, instead of spreading yourself all over like 7 different places.
Yeah.
So okay, so that's where people can find you. So go find him. It will be awesome. Like I said, Kate and I are huge fans of your content, so I'm sure you guys will love it too. And yeah, I think that's all I have for today. Thank you though for all of your thoughts on that. Seriously, like gives so much depth to creativity beyond what just seems so childish sometimes, you know, and really has more value than that. So, okay, well, I'm not going to mess with the intro. Watch this.
All right.
Remember, when life knocks you flat on your back, all you got to do is keep rolling, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Yes, I actually did it.
Bravo.
Ah!